Hi there, and thanks for listening to the Adulting is Easy podcast. This is Lauren, and I manage the Adulting is Easy blog and podcast, which can be found at realadultingiseasy.com and pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts. Please take a second and hit the follow button wherever you're listening if you can safely do so. Today, I'm joined by Kurtis, an accountant who has a love of all things personal finance. After teaching Dave Ramsey classes, he thought there has to be a better way, and thus started the journey of creating his own finance content. Today, Kurtis has a podcast called Delve Into Money and shares additional insights on Twitter daily. Kurtis, thank you for joining me.
Hey, glad to be here, Lauren.
I'm so excited for today. So as usual, our goal is to make adulting a bit easier for our listeners by discussing a personal finance topic, since managing money is a big part of adulting. Today, we're changing it up though. Kurtis and I are going to discuss a popular personal finance book called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Side note, I don't really think you need to have read this book to understand and enjoy this episode, but if you would like to, go ahead, hit the pause button, hit an Amazon order button, and come back in a couple days. But again, I don't think you have to have read the book. So specifically today, Kurtis, you and I are going to talk about what we liked and what we didn't like about this famous book. This book was published, though, in 1937, everyone, so keep that in mind as we go along. There's probably some dated topics and ideas in it. My copy was published by Sound Wisdom and copyrighted in 2017. So if I mention any page numbers, that's where they're from. Overall, just kind of a general summary. The premise of this book is that Hill studied thousands of successful men, and Andrew Carnegie in particular, for 25 years. He found that they all use the same formula to generate riches, and this book is meant to provide those steps for everyone to follow. On the face of it, sounds perfectly fine. Do you have anything to add, Kurtis?
No, we'll just add that he says he found these topics, but no, I'm excited for this conversation. I'm worried I'll give too many points away if I go any further, but I'm a reader and I love reading, but I had a hard time reading this book because it is so know that going in, that it's longer than you would think. It's more dense than you would think too. So,
and more than it needs to be. And that's the thing too. I've read a lot of books too, more than most people. You're one of the only people I know, Kurtis, that has read more books than I have. I haven't done one a week for 5 years, so
yeah,
I'm behind. Well, let's start with kindness, shall we? And talk about what we liked. Okay, I'll go first. So we're going to talk about 3 positives and 3 not so positive things about this particular book. And we're going to start with positives. My number 1 was this idea that Hill has about making desire actionable. So it's kind of like you just can't want to sort of be rich or generate wealth. You have to truly, truly desire it and be willing to work for it. And he gives these 6 steps, which I think are fine. Number 1 is to decide exactly how much money you want. Number 2, determine what you intend to give to get that. 3, a date by which you want to possess the money. And then number 4 is to create a plan and start. So far, pretty general, right? How much money do you want? What are you going to do to get it? When are you going to get it by? Then you have to create this plan and actually get started. Seems simple, but not a lot of people ever get started. Number 5 is take those 4 steps and make them into a statement, and then read it out loud twice a day. Okay, that last part was a bit much for me, right? But yeah, generally, not bad, right? Take your desire and kind of make it this actionable thing. So that's my number 1, Kurtis.
No, I think that was good. I think you could almost write a book just about that itself. But I thought, yeah, that was a good outline, and really people just need a plan in general because so many don't. But
exactly.
But yeah, my number 1 positive was this idea that he has throughout the book, and he talks about consistently, and it's just being persistent and just not giving up. And I think too often people quit before they get anywhere, and they just let themselves get down. And the story that he uses is he has a friend named Barnes who wanted to work with Thomas Edison, and he was singularly focused on wanting to create something with him, wanting to be a partner of Thomas Edison's. And so he talks and walks through the way that his friend went and did that. And he went and started in a job that he didn't necessarily want. He He surrounded himself in the companies of Thomas Edison, and then eventually he got a chance. And I think it was a great story, a great display of someone who knew exactly what they wanted in their future, and he went after that. He, being Napoleon Hill, associates this with like his way of thinking, but really, in my view, like it was again just someone who was persistent about what they wanted. And so I think overall that broad message is great. You could get into some of the nitty gritty details of like, I mean, I don't know that this guy, his friend Barnes, was applying Napoleon Hill's framework to do this. But again, it was a great story of persistence. One of the things from the book that I liked, and this was like what Napoleon Hill said. He says one of the most common causes of failure is the habit of quitting when one is overtaken by temporary defeat. And
Mm-hmm.
I just love the way that was framed. And I think it leads us to the thought of like, you do need to be persistent, but I do think Napoleon Hill does go overboard sometimes in this. And so we need to know, and this is hard for everyone, when to stop and when to continue forward.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's a great message, but I think with a number of things that we see in this book, he does tend to go a little bit overboard on that.
Yeah, when I was reading that story, I thought of it of a big like sports buff. I thought of it like the guys who make it to the NFL. They never
Right.
quit. They were super determined, right? But for every one that did that, there were some that didn't, right? And at what point
Exactly.
is it not a temporary thing like a torn ACL, right? This temporary failure. And at what point should you take a different stance, do a different career kind of a thing?
Yep, exactly. And he doesn't address that at all. It's just
Mm-mm.
strictly
No, the
it's just
opposite.
strictly the exact opposite of that, and he goes way too far in it. So I
Yeah,
think it's a
like do or die.
yeah,
Literally,
yeah,
do it or die.
exactly. And so yeah, it just goes a little bit too far. But
Right, right. But persistence, that's good. That's a good virtue. All right. So my second positive thing that I took from Think and Grow Rich is Hill's stance on education. He goes into some pretty good detail about how you can, it comes down to you can educate yourself without school. And I think that's really important. I think school, especially, I enjoyed school. I was very good at it, which was very lucky when you're a kid if you're good at school growing up. I learned a lot. I learned a lot in college. My degree's in finance. I got a graduate certificate in personal finance. So I think I'm still using my education. I didn't go in debt to get it, but I also do what we're doing now, right? Read books, talk about it, right? There's not only one way to get educated, which I think is really good. And he also talks about you don't have to know everything, right? Get some specialized knowledge, perhaps, but you don't need to. If you're running a business, you don't need to be the chief financial officer and the lawyer and the CEO or whatever, right? You need to have people around you who have the knowledge that you need to tap. And he tells this story, which, as I was picturing, is kind of funny. Henry Ford, apparently, I didn't fact check this, but it's in the book that Henry Ford was like up on the stand testifying about something, and this lawyer is questioning him and is trying to stump him on like historical facts, which I would be stumped immediately.
yeah.
Like I could maybe pick a decade that a war happened, like maybe. And there's how many people died here, how many people this, how many people that. And Henry Ford's like, I don't know, but I know someone who knows. And that's all I really need. I have buttons on my desk where I can summon any bit of knowledge that exists on this earth. So I really liked that point.
Yeah, I love that too. That was actually probably my favorite story in the book because we're even at a better advantage today with the internet and all the things that we have available to us. And I would, I'm at my job, like I'm the CFO of the company. And so it's like, I will be talking about numbers and people will kind of joke or laugh because I can't recall these things just out of the top of my mind. But I'm like, I don't need to recall them. I've got all the financial systems that I need. So I'm going to go look at that because I want to be right. Like I would prefer to do that. So I love that story. But backing up even a little bit more, I think today's world, we're a little bit too much towards college is the way to go and you have to get this formal education. And formal education is just such a small fraction of what your knowledge base is. It's like, I don't know what you would say, but I would say it's like 10% or less. because it creates a way that we can learn, sure, but then you end your education at 22 and you've got until 80 to do the rest of your learning. So again, it's a fraction of your life. And I think we're doing children a disservice by telling them they've got to go to college, that they shouldn't go to trade schools, that they shouldn't, I think those are the right paths. And there's a lot of different paths for a lot of different people. And we put such an emphasis on schooling and formal education that people get to the end of it and they think, oh, I'm done. And then they don't realize that they've got a whole lifetime of learning in front of them.
That's when I started reading, if I'm being honest. Like before graduating college, it was like Harry Potter. And
Yep.
since then, it's
Yep.
been like the actual books where I'm actually learning, getting into my interests. But yeah, 10%, I think that's probably pretty close. So in this way, Hill was a little bit ahead of his time because going to college and getting a quote unquote good job after getting a college degree, that kind of heated up a long time after
Yep.
after he wrote this book.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's a good takeaway to have. And I think the mindset of we're actually kind of pairs with yours. I'll go into my positive number two, since it's kind of the Henry Ford story is kind of something that is an example of this. Is he surrounded himself with the right people, and he surrounded himself with people that knew. And one of the ideas in this book is he talks about mastermind groups, and he talks about surrounding yourself with people that are going to help you, that you're going to learn from. And I had no idea that this was a idea that came from him. But
Right.
these are huge
Yep.
today. And I think it's super, super important. It's amazing the amount of places you can get involved today. And even like, you can be hard on social media, but there's a ton of great social media groups even that you can go in and you can be a part of, and you can learn from people who are steps in front of you. And so I loved seeing this in here. And I think it's super important because it's like, I don't remember where it came from, but I hear it all over the place, but you're the combination, or you're the sum total of the five people that you're around the most. And so you want to surround yourself with people that have the same goals as you. And these mastermind groups are a great way to do that, a great way to grow, and a great way to be able to network and succeed in whatever realm you're in. And so that was one that I latched onto, and it was super interesting to see that this was originated with Napoleon Hill.
Right. I didn't know that either until I read this book. And it basically takes the idea of two minds are better than one, but like to
Yep.
the extreme, like, because, it's more people than that. But yeah, great, great takeaway there. Let's see. My third. So Napoleon Hill loves lists, like so much.
Yeah.
And one of the things that he lists out very painstakingly is the 30 causes of failure. And overall, I actually kind of liked reading these. I think it's really important to understand that when you fail, whether it's temporary or permanently, and this is maybe something that comes from me being in sales, right? If I lose a deal, I want to look back and know why, and see if it's something that I can change, for the future. So I think that's what really stuck out to me about the causes of failure, like lack of purpose, lack of ambition, selecting the wrong person in marriage. That's huge.
Yeah,
That's
that's
huge,
huge.
guys. You young people that you do not want to marry the wrong person. And not just for financial reasons, but also for financial reasons. Insufficient education, which we just talked about. He does say that is easily overcome. A lack of self discipline. That is huge. And that is something that I think you do learn very early on. And that's something that, formal education helps with. Procrastination. Napoleon Hill really hates procrastination. He, like, as much as he talks about persistence, he probably talks about procrastination as like the opposite of that. Lack of persistence, the desire of something for nothing, right? There is no free lunch kind of a thing. Like, don't just want something, be willing to work for it, right? Don't be, I want that big house. Okay, right? What are you going to do to better yourself, to get a better job, to afford that house or whatever? You would fail if you're too cautious, if you pick the wrong business associates, Indiscriminate spending was one of his causes of failure, which probably everybody on this podcast can see how that can lead to failure and is trying to keep that from happening to themselves. The last one that I wanted to call out on the positive side of the 30 causes of failure is the possession of power that was not acquired through self effort, which I thought was interesting. And that's kind of like I thought about, and I know you've read this book, The Millionaire Next Door,
Yeah.
right? It's the idea that the most millionaires in America actually were not given their money, right? And there's this passage in there where it talks about the kids, right, of millionaires, that the ones that get more financial help have
Yeah.
less net worth than the ones who don't get financial help from their parents. And I was just thinking, right, so that's a kind of a plot that contributes to apparently causing failure.
Yeah, that's interesting. That actually plays into some of the other 30 reasons for failure, 30 causes for failure, because it's like that produces a lack of ambition,
Right.
potentially lack of purpose, like self-discipline. There's no reason to have self-discipline if you're not having to achieve yourself. Um, I like the one of like being too cautious, because I think I probably have a little bit of a tendency there of like, you got to be willing to make decisions, and you got to be willing to get off of high center. And I think sometimes we procrastinate, that actually going back to procrastination too.
Mm-hmm.
We procrastinate because we're too hesitant to make too cautious in our decision making. So
Right, right. But one of the weird causes of failure, I've noted some of those too. Guessing instead of thinking.
Mm,
That's like that one I read, and I was thinking, he says almost literally, most people are too indifferent or lazy to acquire necessary facts. And I was thinking, you know what? I think that would lead to procrastination.
yeah.
Sometimes, and a lot in life, you have to make decisions with less than perfect information.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you're defining as guessing, because
Right.
it's like everything is a guess in the long run, because we don't have all the information that we need. So you have to be able to make decisions with imperfect information. And anyways, that's an interesting, that could be a whole interesting sidebar to dig into, because it's like we kind of are guessing at everything. So
Right. So, and he said, I guess maybe if just people don't look up facts, which if that's the case, he was very ahead of his time in that way too. Let's see, other weird causes of failure. And I thought unfavorable hereditary background. So if you have bad genes, he said, there's nothing you can do with a deficiency of brain power.
yeah.
Ouch, ouch, Napoleon. Unfavorable environmental influences during childhood. Literally, that will make you have criminal tendencies. A
Well,
lack.
actually, so I'm going to interrupt here, because
Go
this
ahead.
is
Go.
interesting. I think he's off in some of what he said here, but it's interesting because they've shown that poverty affects the way you process information, and so it's how he's probably thinking of it from a different way,
Right.
but it is interesting to think about that. I actually talk about it in one of mine. There's a book. It's like 7 rules about the brain, or seven. I forget what the title of the book is, but it's super interesting. But it talks about how the things that we need to do to help children overcome some of these things. So,
Hmm.
anyways, that's an interesting. He's coming at it from a 1937
Right.
perspective,
Yeah.
but
No, you're definitely right. And I wish if I could go back and read this again, which I never ever will, but I would count the number of times he said poverty, right?
yeah,
He's very people were of course at this time very afraid of poverty and ending up in poverty. And he's right when he talks about you can have this mindset for getting money, right? Becoming rich, becoming wealthy. And you can also have a mindset for poverty. And if that's
hmm
what you know and that's how your mind was framed, you may subconsciously be heading in that direction. And
hmm
that's one of the things they actually talk about in Secrets of the Millionaire Mind. I don't know if you've read that book or not.
yeah. It's been a while. I don't remember very much of it.
Yeah, that was a good one. Let's see. Lack of controlled sexual urge. More on that later. Wrong selection of vocation. No man can succeed in a line of endeavor in which he does not like. I disagree.
Yeah,
I think you can become successful, right? Especially like there's a lot of people in personal finance rag on 9 to 5s, but
yeah,
like you
for
can
sure.
take your 9 to 5 and build quite a nice portfolio to live off of.
Well, I was gonna say, and like this idea that you don't like something like it's a horrible self-belief. You can like anything if you have an
Mm,
interest in learning. Um,
right.
now, if it's a toxic environment, then get out of the toxic environment. But any vocation can be interesting if you've got a curiosity about yourself. Like, I don't know, that's a negative belief that you're going to be in the wrong vocation. And that probably goes a little bit to one of the other ones I had as a negative. We can talk about later. So
Well, I have two more weird ones. Just to summarize, this is my third positive that I'm taking from the book. I talked about the 30 causes of failure that really resonated with me. Now I'm talking about the ones that really, really don't. And I have two left there. One is intentional dishonesty. And I wrote in my notes, is there any other kind?
yeah.
That's just dishonesty. And I think my favorite one was just negative personality. Like if you just are bad at interacting with people,
Yeah.
you're gonna
Who gets
fail.
to decide what a negative
I
personality
know.
is?
That's why I laughed. I was like, maybe that's me. I can be so blunt sometimes. Maybe it's me.
Well, that's a good thing to put in your book for him, because if you're disagreeing with his book, you can just be like, well, just a negative personality.
Right. True. That's probably me. Yep. Sorry,
That was
Napoleon.
probably super advanced thinking on his part there.
There you go. There. I think you're giving him too much credit, but maybe. All right. What's your third positive then, Kurtis?
My third positive is he talks about knowing your strengths and weaknesses. And I think this is something that and I think he kind of contradicts this a little bit. So I'm not going to give him too much credit on this, because he then talks about like whatever your desires are, just go after it. And just like, and it's like, but if it's your weakness, then like you're not going to succeed. Like it doesn't matter how much you desire. Like, anyways,
Yeah.
that's a whole nother rabbit hole that I don't think we're even really going to touch here. Because anyways, you could have a whole discussion on that, the mindset piece of that. But it's just super important. He talks about very specific goals. Specific goals are super important to succeeding because it helps us frame everything out. And that we just need to be self-aware, because it's like if we're unable to acknowledge our weaknesses, we're never able to admit that we're wrong. If we're never able to admit that we're wrong, like we're just never going to improve. That's
Mm-hmm.
like the first step to improvement. And then the other piece is like, just, and this may be just my personal, but it's like when you're unwilling to admit your weaknesses, you're going to be more likely to make excuses about why you failed at something versus accepting that this is just not something that you're great at. So that was a positive. I liked that section, but again, it goes back to I think he oversold it. So that kind of goes back to my first point of him overselling the persistence. I think he oversold. He says strengths and weaknesses, but he's oversold in other areas of just going after whatever you desire. And if that's in your weakness, then I don't know that's going to be too helpful.
Right. Right. And you literally should work on it until you die. So
Yeah.
yeah, and it's something about strengths and weaknesses too. Recently, I have liked the thinking that maybe you're weak in some areas, but find people who can compensate for those weaknesses, right? Maybe in
Yeah.
this case, put them in your mastermind group
Mm-hmm.
and then make your strengths stronger. I think when we were kids, there was this idea of, all right, let's look at your strengths and weaknesses and let's try to get rid of your weaknesses.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like the idea. I mean, don't have a negative personality, obviously, right? But, um, right, I like the idea of keeping people around you who compensate for those weaknesses a little better.
Yeah. I think that's a good point.
All right. Okay, got those out of the way. So, if it isn't obvious already, Kurtis and I don't share the popular opinion about this book that it is a must read personal finance book. We really didn't like it at all when we read it initially. And poor Kurtis, I made him read it again. But before we dive into specific content we don't like, I just wanted to talk about like some kind of global issues I have with the book. It's almost comical the sheer number of times Napoleon Hill asks you to reread either the book, a chapter, a passage, or a sentence. I mean, you would literally never stop reading this book if he's like, "Oh yeah, okay, come back and read this chapter every 2 weeks." It's just
Yeah.
I mean, it'll be like you'll read a sentence and it'll be like, "Now go back and read that sentence 4 more times."
Yeah.
constantly. He's always which to me is just, it's super egotistical, I think, is why that bothered me.
Maybe that's why we didn't like the book, is we didn't follow his instructions. Maybe if we would have just followed his instructions more closely, we would have loved it. So
Yeah, but see why I think it's egotistical, Kurtis, is because
no, it is.
you read 52 books a year, and he wants you to read one.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
The next thing is just like sexism, which is probably just a product of the 1930s, but he's very clear that this what he studied men, and he says in a couple places this is for men or women, but he never once gives a story of a woman. Basically, I mean, there were a couple of like just like an opera singer, maybe like a writer. So I think he kind of like tried, but in a very weak way, to bring strong females into this, and he never once mentions, like it's all the pronouns are like he. If someone wants to become wealthy, he must whatever, and so
Yeah,
that bothered
I
me.
don't think they knew about pronouns back here, but maybe let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe women didn't exist in 1937. Maybe it was after 1937
Yeah, you
women
might be
came to
right.
be.
You might be right.
So
That might
we need
be
to
it.
maybe do our research on that
I'll
and
have to ask
check
my
on that.
grandma.
Yeah.
Oh no, she was born in the 30s. Let's
Oh
see.
shoot.
So
Dang.
debunked. So length. We've talked about this. It is freaking too long. Most books, I don't know if you found this, Chris. I find most books are like just under 300 pages long.
Hmm.
This is almost 400, and it's very repetitive. Very repetitive. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then also, he does this thing, which I absolutely can't stand, is all of the capitalized words.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what that's about. That's painful.
It makes me read it that way.
Hmm.
Like, here, let me just open the book here. It may be converted into power by organizing it into definite plans and by expressing those plans in terms of action. Like, that's how I read it. It's like a very violent way to read.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
So,
Yeah. Maybe they didn't, maybe that was his only way to do it, but yeah, I don't know how many pages it is because mine was on an ebook,
okay.
but I really think if you took out the repetitive things that he repeated, like I think it would be, you could take out a third of the pages,
Mm-hmm.
and that may be a little bit conservative, but yeah,
Yeah, I think you could. I
it's
think you could cut 100 pages.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So,
I'll come to your defense. I agreed to this because I didn't remember it was 400 pages. And if I would have remembered it was that long, I probably wouldn't agree to do it. So I was a sucker here too of thinking, "Oh yeah, this is easy." So
well, I'm enjoying this conversation though, and I'm glad I have somebody to share my misery with, because everyone that I've ever asked about this book has freaking loved it.
yeah.
And so those are my kind of global issues with it. But since I started with positives, why don't you start with our negatives?
Okay, sounds good. So this is where the gloves come off, I guess, a little bit. Again, this is my opinion. This
Mm-hmm.
is, whatever you say is your opinion. So don't hate us too much. But I like, my biggest problem from the very beginning with this book is, you get in and it's like very early on, he says that he spent 25 years researching and he analyzed more than 25,000 people. That is 1,000 people a year. That's more than 2 people a day. And that's in a time when you couldn't fly anywhere. That's like, that's just insane. That's not possible. So it immediately got me questioning, is this book really true? So the first time I read that and I said, that's weird. So I just started Googling Napoleon Hill and just looking up things about him and trying to learn about him. And in that, it immediately kind of confirmed some of my suspicions, some of my fears that I was seeing when I was reading this, in that before he wrote this book, he did not have really any success. He had just really shady kind of things that he did, embarrassing failures. Like there's a book, or not a book, there's an article on the website Gizmodo that kind of goes into some of these things, but he just had a really sketchy background and had uh, just a lot of like outright fraud, just complete fraud in his background. And then you add to that that there's a big time question out there that he even, it's centered around the fact that Andrew Carnegie, that he learned this and he was recording this for Andrew Carnegie, but he did not talk about this at all until after Andrew Carnegie died, which did not give Carnegie a chance to reply or acknowledge this. And a biographer of Carnegie said that there's no record that the two men met. So we don't know if the men met or not. Maybe they met, but no matter what happened, if Napoleon Hill had as close a relationship to Carnegie as he acts like or he talks about in this book, there would be record of them meeting. So maybe he learned from him, maybe he learned from these people from afar, but to me that you have to look at the source where everything is coming from. And to me, this just put a sour taste in my mouth that while there may be some good things in this book, I just cannot get behind a book. I cannot recommend a book like this to other people just because of Napoleon Hill's reputation. So for me, that was like the biggest thing. So that was kind of my number one thing that I disliked about it.
And it has to be the number one thing.
Yeah.
And like you just said, like, think about the time. There would be letters.
Yeah.
People
Absolutely.
kept their letters back then, big time. So there would have been, if they have as close of a relationship, and Hill talks about literal conversations with like text and like dialogue that he had with Andrew Carnegie.
Yeah.
So it's pretty scandalous if he straight made that up. And you're right.
Yeah.
I'm not great with like the magnitude of numbers. I'm like, okay, yeah, a number. 25,000 people in 25 years. That is insane. You can, and maybe it's the word study, right? Maybe did he like read about, like, did he read that many names? Like,
yeah.
What are we talking about when we're saying that? Like, one person could not have done that, especially with the access to information or in access to information that they had in the 1930s.
Like, if you're having to work every day, and I think it was 2.7 people that you'd have to study, even if you didn't meet them, even if you were just reading about them, can you read about two to three people's lives a day for 25 years straight? No, you can't. And 2 to 3 people, even if you take all of your waking hours, say you get 16 hours a day for 25 years that you did this, you're 3 people, you're spending less than 5 hours of research. Maybe in today's internet world that would work, but I guarantee that didn't work for Napoleon Hill. So it's just bogus from that perspective. And anyways, I could get on a rant about that because it's just extremely frustrating that it's okay. Like, okay, if you want to tell a story, tell us you're telling a story. And we can still learn from afar from people. But you're framing this as you knew these people, these are your interactions, these are your things, and it just can't be true. Can't be. Not possible.
No. I mean, we just picked out a few things, each of us, even though we don't like this book. Our opinion is that we don't like this book. So we just picked some stuff out. If he just told us it was a story, that would probably make that all better. All right. I've been dreading this since we said we were going to do it.
Number one. This is the doozy I'm looking forward to.
Okay. I dislike all of chapter 11. And it's about sex transmutation. Okay? Which, in case you were wondering, because I was, means switching the mind from thoughts of physical expression to thoughts of some other nature. Okay? So if you can read this chapter without, especially as a female, without feeling physically ill, I don't know how. I mean, it's disgusting. And this goes back to what I was saying about like the pure like sexism of it. This is about men, right? This chapter is about how you basically, if a man takes his sexual emotions and gives them an outlet in the form of creative effort, he will become a genius. Like what?
But I'm sure that's only men too, right?
Yes, it says man. Yeah. It says man. I have many quotes. I'm going to keep going. So all successful men are quote unquote highly sexed. page 273. Highly sexed. Now, Kurtis, if you're reading for 5 hours a day about a person for 25 years and you're studying 25,000 people, where are you reading about how highly sexed all these people are?
Yeah, that's a great question.
I mean, that's my thought. He says all geniuses had great sex drives. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you would know that.
I don't well, and here's the deal, like you hear about all these scandals with famous people and you hear about all these things. So it's like, okay, maybe that was going on in his day and so he took this to mean these things, but he's saying the way that you become genius and you become at the top is by switching your mind away from those things. But then he sits there and sells you on how high all these guys' sex drives were because of all
Exactly.
their actions of acting on that. That doesn't like logically, that doesn't make any sense.
No, if they were taking their sex drive and turning it into creative effort, you wouldn't have the high sex drive, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. So men seldom succeed before 40 because they're too busy sowing their wild oats. I'm paraphrasing, but he basically says that exact same thing. So, guys, if you could just keep it in your pants, you would all be geniuses before 40 and not after.
I have a counterpoint to that one is
Okay.
the thing called compounding and it's a thing called time, you know?
Right. Exactly. Like, that's the thing. Like, I know so much more now in my 30s than I did in my 20s. And I was just thinking about this the other day. Like, my husband and I were talking about what, if we look 5 years back, so we've been together for 6 years now, how far we've come
Yeah.
in 5 years. And I know so much more sitting here now in fall of 2021 than I knew in the spring of 2020 because we like took on this real estate endeavor, which was buying 120-year-old property and renovating it. I have learned so much about real estate and about myself and about my relationship. And it's incredible. So exactly. Of course,
Yep.
like, yes, of course.
Well,
Of
and
course
just
you are successful when you're older.
yeah. And just like it was less than a month ago, I was rereading a book that I had read years and years ago, and I realized that one of the things that I'd like taken and internalized was from that book, and I didn't even realize it. Like you are learning things all the time
All the
that
time.
are adding on your previous knowledge, and that had become a baseline belief, but I had no idea where it came from. I
Mhm.
thought it was just me being brilliant, right? And then it turned out it was this book that I'd read, about 15 years ago or something. And so, anyways, yeah, that's we're a little off track on that, but it's just crazy that's even written in there.
I knew when you and I talked about this book that I was going to attack this chapter. So let's see. Successful salespeople are successful because they're communicating their sex energy. And I was like, I hope my husband doesn't read that because I'm in sales and I'm good
Yeah,
at it.
yeah,
So great. Just great. It's not because I've read a ton of sales books or worked really hard. Let's see. Oh, I have a quote here. Most hardened criminals can be reformed through the influence of a woman's love. Page 282.
yeah. Let's see the statistics behind that, where he
I
got that from, right?
Yeah, maybe death row. I
Yeah.
bet they're like, hey, listen, to get some women up in here, I'll get better. Like, come on. Let's see. Oh God, this is the worst one. I'm getting heated. Women make or break men based on their understanding of love, sex, and romance. And if they don't have this understanding of love, sex, and romance, women are quote unquote permitting men to lose interest in them.
A little bit scary, but that you see, and up until recently have seen a lot of that mentality still
Yes.
holding true. But
Right.
that,
Like, let's not blame boys will be boys, right? Let's not blame them for stepping out on their wives.
mhm.
Although I am going to give him credit. Where are my notes here from this chapter? He does say many men deteriorate after putting aside their first wife.
Mm.
I was like, okay, yeah, I guess you're right. Let's see. Only a couple more here. Men are easily managed by the woman of their choice, and it's okay that men won't admit this because women know that is a manly trait.
Yeah, I don't even know what that means. Like,
No man will admit that he is influenced by his wife.
yeah.
Like, come on, Napoleon. Ugh. I wonder what his wife thinks of this chapter. Men are only complete with the modifying influence of women.
Yeah, and I don't know what that means either,
I
because
like.
I
I'm
mean,
sorry.
I would agree that we're better together than we are apart, but it's like, anyways, he just he goes off so many rabbit holes in this deal, and I will admit I did not like, I just, it's too much, and I just kind of, it's one of those things where I started and I'm just like, oh gosh, no, like
No, I knew I was doing this
I
chapter.
just start
I
skimming.
read every word. I
Oh
read every word
gosh.
because I'm like, oh God, this is awful. And my husband was walking by. He's like, I saw your notes for that book. I'm like, oh yeah. He's like, the word sex was on there a lot. I was like, yeah. And I explained it to him. Oh my gosh. So, but that I add that one, men are only complete without the modifying influence of women. It's probably about the only like semi derogatory thing he says about men.
Hmm.
But this whole chapter, and this is something that like the premise of this book, which as much as this guy likes lists, it's not laid out very well, but it's like the 13 steps to riches. So this is like a step or something,
Yeah.
right? That you need to hit the sex transmutation step. And it's all totally about men. It's totally about men. So if there was any question along the way that men or women could use this formula that 25,000 people have used to get rich, supposedly, a woman really couldn't, because it's basically you have to be a man, and in order to become this genius who gets riches, you have to be highly sexed and be channeling your sex drive at the same time, be highly sexed, but also be translating your sex drive into other creative
Yeah.
endeavors.
Well, it's so count, like his main point is so counter to some of his sub points, and it just doesn't make any sense. I've actually seen some people rather recently kind of talk about this concept. It just kind of blows my mind that this concept is still around. Like, there's definitely a thing like you need to control your thoughts, but it's like, I don't know. This is just completely off the rails for me. So it's hard to follow this one up for. So thanks for going with that one
Sorry, I
first.
had to. I went with my number one. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm just doing it. And until this point, again, this is chapter 11. I don't know how many chapters are, like 15, I think. I was
Hmm.
like, when I read this the first time, I was like, kind of with him. Like, I've got this book has been recommended to me so many times. I was like, okay, here we go. Da, da, da. And then I saw this. I was like, oh my God, no, I'm done. I'm done. He lost me.
Yeah. So, all right, we ready to move on to my
Yes,
second
I'm sorry. I'm
dislike?
done. I'm done with that rant.
Okay, so the second dislike that I had was that he made a point kind of early in the book, and he said, and this again goes to what we've talked about in our likes, was that he will go to the extreme, and he talked about like when you get your desire for something, that you do not keep your eyes open for any other opportunity, and this is such a painful belief. This is such a painful thing to teach people because, okay, maybe they're like, most of us do not have these desires that he's talking about, like this one burning desire. And it's a horrible thing to teach people, because then if they don't have the burning desire, they think something is wrong with them. Like, they're like, what is wrong? Like, why am I not
Right.
good? Like, what? Like, you are driving people into the ground if they don't have that one burning belief, and you're beating them over the head, with that concept. And I can look in my own life and look at times where if I had my eyes shut, I would have missed great opportunities. Like, my very first job, well, not my very first one, my first kind of job that I was excited about out of college, I worked at the corporate offices for Love's Travel Stops, and it's like a growing company, and it was had a lot of opportunities, and I just knew like I wanted to climb that ladder. I wanted to be there for a long time, and someone that I knew but wasn't real close with just randomly messaged me and say, "Hey, would you be interested in having a conversation?" And there was part of me that just wanted to say no. But if I had
Mm-hmm.
said no, like, I would have missed out on everything that's happened since then, and I guarantee you I wouldn't be at the same place. And it's all because I just kept my eyes open and was willing to have conversations. That's so big. One of the like, I've read the book. I don't know if you've read it, Lauren. It's called the book Essentialism. Greg McKeown, and one of the things he talks about there is you want to focus on like what's essential to you. But part of that process is a little bit counterintuitive. Is you want to take in as many options as you can, and that's what saying no allows you to do. It allows you to take in all those options so that you can find the optimal path. If
Yeah.
you
I
have
mean,
this, yeah, go ahead.
what was his example? Right? Like it was like an army landed on the shore and the guy burnt the ships, so they had to succeed
Yeah,
because they couldn't
right.
go back.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
If my commander did that, I would shoot him. I mean, I don't probably not because then he would just kill me. But what? That's insane. That's such an
Yeah.
insane idea. And like you're talking about, in your career professionally, you should always be making connections and having conversations.
Yeah.
It's just the right way to do it.
Well, I'm gonna jump on my third one a little bit here, but it's like
Yeah.
because he just completely takes these stories and he makes them for his purpose when they're very clearly not for his purpose. And so anyway, so that's one of the big things that I kind of struggled with there is like we all don't have these burning desires. You're shutting people down who don't have this. You're telling them they're wrong. And then because of that, they're going to say no to opportunities that come because they think, oh, well, that's not in my burning desire, even if they don't know what that is. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's nothing bad about a conversation. There's nothing bad about keeping your options open. You need to have a plan and you need to be going towards it. And so maybe that option means nothing, but entertaining or hearing out other opportunities is a great thing because it's going to allow you to further solidify the direction you're heading if it's not a detour. So,
Well, absolutely, absolutely, great point. Let's see, my second dislike. Oh man, this one's wild too. So we talked about masterminds, and Curtis and I are both in agreement that masterminds are a good idea, and that you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with, and you can elevate who you are as a person by elevating who you spend your time with. So Napoleon Hill takes this to the most extreme end I have ever heard, and and this is after the sex chapter. So as I'm reading, I'm already like weirded out by him. He created an imaginary council. Okay. He created his own mastermind group in his head, which I think, by the way, that's not a mastermind. That's just your mind.
yeah.
That's one brain, right? So this gets nuts, guys. Just buckle. If you're driving, pull over because it's really weird. Um, so he he his imaginary council, it starts as this group of 9, and it's all these names that you have heard: Emerson, Paine, Edison, Darwin, Lincoln, Burbank. I hadn't actually heard of him. He's a botanist. Napoleon, not Napoleon Hill, Napoleon Bonaparte, Ford, and Carnegie. Okay, so these are like his imaginary council. And these are, I kind of looked everybody up. Like there's some basically inventors, botanists. You've got Darwin, who's this scientist or this naturalist. Napoleon is a military leader. Ford and Carnegie are these industry guys. And then like Paine wrote a bunch of essays. So you can kind of get the idea of all these really smart white guys that were in his imaginary council. And every night he would meet with these people, and they developed personalities. They certainly had opinions. And he says at some point, doesn't he, Curtis, that he told Edison about this at some point?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
And
Um,
Edison didn't say that was like ape crap
well,
crazy.
this is again the guy who says he
Right.
he he did all this. So it's like, well, did he, anyways, what?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
he didn't he like almost the way Hill says he responded was like an affirmative, So over time, as he's having his imaginary council every single evening with these guys who, I'll give Hill credit, he read a lot about these men. He had to have, right? He probably knew very well about these guys, which actually takes away from the idea that he studied 25,000 people, not just these 9, but I
Mhm.
digress.
Yeah.
So he is having these councils, and they become so real. I can't remember who it was. Some guy was always late, right? He always stayed later than everybody else. And like one time, this other guy sat in somebody else's seat, and it was like a whole thing. And he finally is like scaring himself with how real it was, and he stops having his imaginary councils. And then some night he's in bed, and Lincoln walks up to him and is like, "Hey, you really should start the imaginary councils again because you need to fulfill your purpose." And that, for some reason, didn't scare him more. He went back to having the imaginary councils, and now his imaginary council is like 50 people by the end of the chapter, and it includes Christ.
just all people on Napoleon Hill's level, right? That's
Right.
what we're.
Exactly. Because
That's who.
he has to fulfill and this is his purpose. This was it. I just can't. I read,
So his purpose was hallucinations.
just kind of, I was very like, the guy's nuts. He's just nuts. I mean, there's just, I don't want to throw that around loosely. I don't want to trivialize mental illness. Okay. I myself, I said this recently, I've been diagnosed with depression in the past and I've been to therapy, and you need to take mental illness very seriously. But he dove right in and went back to it. It's just, I'm reading this and I'm like trying to figure out, is he telling us that we should meet with like 5 real people? Or
Yeah.
should we create a fake group in our own head again? Also,
Yeah. Well, you think about this, like he took something that was good where he's learning about these people, he's researching the past successes of people, which is great. Like
yeah,
that's something he should be preaching from the, highest mountain he could find, of like telling you to go seek out the previous, these people, read about them, learn about them. And then he takes it and puts this twist on it that just makes it just like unpalatable. Like just like we're now talking about hallucinations as, as reality, and he's basically telling us that we should all hallucinate on this stuff. Just wild.
what's your third one?
Okay, so my third one is what I kind of mentioned at the end is, and again, I went a little bit more broad in kind of some of uh, my takeaways. So I think it's going to be a good back and forth that because
Mm-hmm.
we get real specific and then a little bit more broad. And so it's like he takes all of these stories and he's manipulating them for his purpose. And I talked about how he did that on the last point. Well, going back to actually the first story where he talks about his friend Barnes and how he wanted to go work with Thomas Edison. And you saw nowhere in that story that he used Hill's framework. He just took his story and manipulated it for his purpose. The other one, and this is the one that probably gave me the most trouble, is he talks about how his son was born without ears and how he refused to believe that his son was never going to be able to hear, despite not having any of the, I guess, any of the parts that he needed to hear. And so he talked about how he didn't agree with the doctor's opinion. And so he silently disagreed with him in his own heart and then decided that his son would hear and speak, and that he could not, like nature could not overcome his desire. And then it turns into like his son can't, from what I can tell, never truly gained like full function. He definitely like did have some, but he still struggled, so he never gained full. There's admission of that in there. And then he also talks about how he denied his son learning sign language because he felt like that was counterintuitive to what he was trying to teach him. So he's removing like tools that could have helped his son because of his own purpose. And this is where his beliefs on this are super dangerous. Like we just don't like it's super dangerous to like manipulate other people because of what your belief is. And again, this is a story that he's saying he was right, even though some of the details he gives makes it clear that he was not completely right about his son. And so again, he's manipulating it and he's making up his own belief of, he's changing what means to be right in this situation. And so anyways, I know that the lack of sign language thing, Lauren, we kind of briefly mentioned that, just how crazy that was.
Yeah, just this idea, that whole story broke my heart. And you're supposed to be siding with him. Like, heck yeah, you were the dad, you had this plan for your son. Um, you made him one of the most determined people in the world. He took this negative of not having ears or, the hearing equipment or whatever parts in his mind, in his head, right? He took that, and instead of that being a disability, it became an asset because he was like very hardworking and whatever. But all I'm hearing is this poor kid who wasn't allowed to learn sign language, which would have been the best way for him to communicate. Instead, he had to sit up front. The teachers had to yell at him. And I'm just thinking about, I don't know. I feel like kids today, I don't know if they're meaner or not than they were back then. I feel like in some ways kids are a little more aware
Mm-hmm.
of that they sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never hurt me was a bunch of crap. Words are very painful. So I'm just picturing this kid being bullied mercilessly. And if he somehow avoided that and did not become this damaged person from these years of ridicule, right? How the story ends is a hearing aid is invented that works for his situation, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he puts the hearing aid on and then he can hear, and then he goes and works for the hearing aid company. So it sounds, if it's true, it sounds like there's a happy ending. But I almost thought of that, like I said about NFL players, right? Just because there was a happy ending and the son made it to quote unquote like the NFL, he ended up being able to hear. Like, what about? I mean, that could have gone a lot of different directions. I
Well,
mean, he could
and
have ended up
yeah,
not
uh,
doing that, not being the successful if he was, if it's even true.
yeah. Well, and that's the other piece here is then Napoleon Hill. He had nothing to do with the hearing aid company, but he
No.
co-opts that as his success because
Hmm.
he believed his son was going to hear.
Great point.
And it's like that's just insane. That's again manipulating the story, trying to manipulate. And this goes back to knowing your strengths and weaknesses. Well, if you believing something, you can then just take whatever happens in the world and say, "Oh yeah, like that was totally me." Like that was like you're now taking credit. You're now taking like it was you. Like what type of self-centered belief is that? And it's just crazy. And like you said, I hope his son, like it seems like you said it was a happy ending, but you kind of have to not worry, but you kind of question like, is it completely true? Is it 100% the way that he said it was? Just when you hear everything, and we didn't talk about this here, but it's like he also talks about how devastating all this was. Like, it's very much talking down, and it's probably just a function of it being 1937. But a child without hearing can be full without hearing. Like they
Exactly.
and so that was just hard. That's a little bit hard to read just because, but again, it's probably I'll give him a little bit of the credit of the doubt, like the benefit of the doubt on that because it was 1937, but
Right.
again, that
But
was
here's the
painful.
thing. If if it's so important for him to live a normal life and to not be different because of his hearing, how does putting him in regular school and not teaching him sign language accomplish that?
Right, right.
You're basically admitting that he needs to just be in a normal school and have hearing to
Hmm.
be normal, right? It just, but you're right. I mean, it's some benefit of the doubt for the time. I will give you that there. All right. My last dislike here is a little bit more high level, and it's this premise. And he goes hard into it at the end. He kept a lot of the crazy stuff at the end. The premise that you can pick up other people's thoughts through vibrations of the ether.
Oh, you don't that sorry, you don't do that?
Are you telepathic?
I wish, right? No.
I have this
I
quote.
don't wish that. I don't wish that.
No, God, no. What God, that movie, that Mel Gibson movie where you can hear what women think, it's like a curse,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So mental telepathy is a reality, quote unquote, page 358. He believes that you can pick up on someone's thoughts just by being next to them, which some of the stuff that he says, he talks about hunches a lot. And I'm a pretty strong believer in hunches. And this kind of goes back to what we were saying before, where like you kind of have to sometimes make decisions based on like kind of a guess or a hunch. He talks about hunches like they're positive things, but then he says, you shouldn't really be guessing when you're making decisions, right? But I tend to believe hunches are your subconscious mind connecting a lot of dots from your
Yep.
experience. and you just don't know why you're feeling that way, but you're feeling that way. So if there is, to any extent, you are picking up on other people's thoughts, it's not from the vibration of the ether. It is from probably their body language, maybe their facial expressions, maybe just knowing them really well, right? I mean, the example that he gives, he equates it to a radio, which again, with the times, it makes sense. And it's this idea that the radio station takes sound waves from people's voices, changes those sound waves so that they can travel over distances and then be received by some other equipment that picks up those sounds and then reconverts them into sounds that we can hear. And he is saying that if you get your mind to vibrate at a high enough level, you will be able to pick up on other people's vibrations, and also you can control whether it's positive or negative ones that filter into your subconscious.
So maybe we're just not vibrating at a high enough level.
I know,
Maybe,
I'm vibrating at such a low level.
yeah, we're just vibrating at the wrong level. Yeah, this it's interesting. I didn't think about this till just now, but it was the book I mentioned earlier. It's and I went and looked it up just so I could actually say what it is. But it's a book called 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. It's by a woman, Lisa Feldman, and she talks about how our brain is actually processing stuff more quickly than we even realize. In that, that's exactly what you're talking about with a hunch. Like it's all of your previous experience coming to be, and you just don't realize because of how quickly it happens. And it's all your previous experience, it's all your previous knowledge, like all that stuff coming, and that develops into that initial hunch, that initial gut feeling that you've got. And that's why people say like trust your gut, because that's exactly what it is it's your brain working faster than you can even process anything, and then you just don't know where it came from.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of brain science in this. Obviously they didn't have this back in 1937, but it doesn't change the insanity of this way of thinking.
No, and since you brought that up, do you remember when he talks about the science of prayer?
Yeah.
He said we were going to be studying that in schools by now. The science of prayer, which he could not have been more wrong. We are moving prayer so far out of schools. But this idea that if your prayers aren't being answered, it's because you're not vibrating your prayers in your brain at the right vibration.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to it's the other thing of like, well, if you're not doing it his way, you're failing and you're just a failure. Like that's that's such a dangerous mindset that again, we're seeing crop up again. So,
Right. Good point. I didn't connect that. All right, Curtis. Well, we did it. We did our three positive
we
things. I
made it.
think we tried to give Hill some credit, and then we talked about the three biggest things that we didn't like, and really truly how we feel about the book. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, I would just say that, you know, we were pretty like we don't like this book. If you like it, that's great. My problem is like I just can't, to me this book kind of creates followers. It creates people that fall like, and that's what Napoleon Hill's desire was here, is he was wanting to be this self-help guru, and so he wanted to create followers, and you just don't see like truly balanced thinking. It's all super super extreme,
Mm-hmm.
and when those things get misconstrued, it's super dangerous. And so that's why like I will never, like one, I don't like it, but even like some of the base points, like if you go in and you take out all the junk, some of the base points are really good, but they're hard to see through all of the stuff that he goes into, in my view. And that makes it really dangerous. And that's why even if I agreed with all the base points, I couldn't recommend this book, is because it's too easy to get off track with some of his stuff. And just to kind of, I mean, add what I said, my biggest dislike of this book was the source of the information matters. Like we don't take advice from Hitler, right? Because of all the other bad things that he did. And so Hill says and goes with these assumptions that he learned based off of all these things, from all these people in this particular way, and that's how he became rich. But when you find he became rich from actually writing this book, and you find that like he didn't have some of these relationships, he says, like it kind of just puts a damper on everything. And And I think that was why it's so painful for me to read both times that I've read it now. I'm like a big proponent of quitting books. And so that was actually the thing I hate about this the most is I couldn't quit the book and I just wanted to, but I had to power through, which I did, powered through. We made it. And I enjoyed this. It's a fun conversation to have. So
I
thanks
enjoyed it
for letting
too.
me do this.
Misery enjoys company, so thanks for joining
Yeah,
me.
for
That's
sure.
so funny that you quit books. Almost never quit a book.
I
I'm
used
like,
not to. Yeah.
I'm gonna finish this book. I freaking
Yeah.
started. I'm gonna I don't know what it is. I don't. It's dumb. Like my husband and I were just having this conversation this morning.
Yeah, exactly. And I used to not quit, but I've changed in the last few years. Um, and it has made, I've read quite a bit in the last 2 to 3 years. I've read significantly more. And that's part of the reasons is because I've just quit books and then you get to stuff that you really enjoy. Right.
Right.
And so then it makes you just want to get back to reading. So
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, let's wrap it up. So, managing money is a huge part of adulting, and you should absolutely read books to learn more about it, but not this one, in my opinion. If you want to learn more about money, I recommend The Simple Path to Wealth, Set for Life, or Your Money or Your Life to Start. A book that I read this year that is actually about kind of successful people and how they got there is a book called Outliers. That might be
yeah.
something for people to read. Yeah, I would think that you've read that. What about you, Curtis? You're like basically a
Yeah.
walking library in your head.
Well,
Tell us some books we should read.
that's a little bit of an oversell maybe, but I love The Simple Path to Wealth. I'm trying to remember. I don't remember Set for Life, so I may have to actually go check that one out.
That's a bigger
Um,
pockets book.
okay, yeah, I should read that then. I would recommend kind of my two go-to ones, I guess at this point, The Psychology of Money,
Mm-hmm.
which was written last year by Morgan Housel. Like that just eclipsed everything for me, and so I would suggest people read that.
Yep.
And then I really like I Will Teach You to Be Rich by
Yeah.
Ramit Sethi. He's got a really different perspective, which is great, and he has a lot of different mindset things that are going to be different from traditional stuff, but I think are all great. And so I loved those are kind of my two top books at the moment. But Simple Path for Wealth too, like that's one of my favorites of all time. So.
Absolutely. I think I Will Teach You to Be Rich and The Simple Path to Wealth kind of have actually very similar,
Mm-hmm.
like you kind of walk away with very similar ideas, right? How to make investing simple. Ramit he's so the opposite of boring in the way that he
Mm-hmm.
writes.
Yep, absolutely.
And then I'll put those other ones, the 7.5 lessons about the brain and essentialism. I'll put those in the notes as well. And then we'll see if we can find that article about Napoleon Hill that you mentioned and
Okay.
put that in the notes. So Curtis, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, if you're looking to get in touch with me, you can just go to delveintomoney.com or I mentioned was mentioned in my bio, I'm on Twitter all the time. So if you're on Twitter, go to just KWH, which are my initials. DM me there, message me there. Love to connect with people.
Yeah,
So, and
perfect.
again, thank you, Lauren, for doing this. This was a lot of fun. I've not gotten to. I don't think either of us have talked about a book in a negative light before, so it's kind of fun to go that direction. A new, unique way to go about it. So.
Yeah, it was fun. And thanks for sticking with me. You guys can find me on Twitter at Adulting is Easy. I'm also on Facebook at that same name. You can email me at realadultingiseasy@gmail.com and show support at patreon.com/adultingiseasy. Thanks everybody for listening. Hopefully we've made adulting a little easier for you.